Well, welcome everyone. My name is Evelyn Forget, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's event. Dr. Jiaying Zhao is about to tell us about some of her recent work that involves cash transfers and the unhoused population in Vancouver. Before we get started, I'd like to take just a minute to acknowledge the land we're living on and working on. While this is a virtual event, I'm joining you from Winnipeg tonight, which is on Treaty 1 land. The campuses of the University of Manitoba are located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Before I introduce our guest speakers, I just want to make a couple of housekeeping comments. We are recording this event tonight, so it should be available afterwards. While you are all muted, we'd still like to invite you to participate tonight. So I'm going to ask you if you have any questions as we move forward, to ask those questions in the chat. And Hannah, who's here somewhere, Hannah will be monitoring those questions, and she'll ask them after the presentation so that we can look at some of these issues that arise tonight in a little bit more detail. I believe the poster that went out about this said that this event would last an hour and a half. I'm actually thinking it'll probably last an hour, so we'll go from 7:30 until about 8:30. Now, one of the consequences of the last 3 years is that we've all become very, very aware that many of the social policies that we have in place are not functioning as well as we'd like them to function. In particular, homelessness is an economic, social, and health crisis. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by Basic Income Manitoba, the Manitoba Public Health Association, and Homelessness Winnipeg, the Social Planning Council, and the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy, each of which deals with homelessness in its daily work. Now, if you're not familiar with us, I'd like to invite representatives from each of these organizations to list their websites or their contact information in the chat if they'd like to do so. From the perspective of Basic Income Manitoba, which I represent, we're an organization that advocates for a basic income guarantee paid in cash to Canadians with low incomes so that everyone, all of us, can meet our basic needs. One of the challenges we often face is the fear that there are certain parts of the population, certain groups of people, for whom cash transfers might cause more harm than good. Those who are unhoused are often identified as one such group. So that's actually what we're addressing tonight. Does giving cash transfers to people who are unhoused cause more harm than good? So it therefore gives me very great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this evening. Dr. Jiaying Zhao has done some really tremendous work on how cash transfers affect the lives of people who are unhoused. She's an associate professor in the Department of Psychology and the Institute for Resources, Environment, and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. And she's the Canada Research Chair in Behavioral Sustainability. She's also a faculty affiliate of the Center for Effective Global Action at the University of California in Berkeley, and a member of Canada's Financial Literacy Research Subcommittee from 2018 until the present. So please, Dr. Zhao, we are looking forward to hearing about your work tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Evelyn, for inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I'm going to start sharing my screen.
That's perfect.
Just a second.
It's not working.
There you go. Just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're seeing. No, you're seeing the wrong slide.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me just start again. Okay, this is better. Okay. Okay. Are you?
No, I don't think it's working.
Huh. All right. You see?
No.
Let me just start one more time.
There it is.
Can you see?
I thought we had it for a minute there. There we are.
Oh,
There we are.
all
Perfect.
good?
It's there.
Okay. Great, awesome. Sorry about that. Thanks for joining this talk, and I'm joining you today from the traditional, ancestral, and ceded territory of the Musqueam people. And I'm also monitoring the chat here, so if you have any questions, put it in the chat. I will try to get to it as I can. So today I'm going to talk about the impact of unconditional cash transfers on individuals who experience homelessness. Homelessness is a social, economic, and health crisis in Canada, as Evelyn said. This is the latest nationwide count of homelessness in Canada, based on the time, I think, point in time count a couple of years ago. I think the estimate was 35,000 people experience homelessness on a given night due to evictions, job loss, domestic violence, mental health challenges, and addictions. And every year, about 250,000 people are homeless in Canada. Homelessness is expensive. Right now, it costs society anywhere from $55,000 to $132,000 per person per year to manage homelessness. This includes running emergency shelter services, social services, healthcare, and justice services. And we also have a growing population that are precariously housed or at the verge of becoming homeless. So this is almost a quarter of our population, or 3 million households. And 1 in 5 rental households in this country spend more than half of their income on rent. So these are kind of the potential bracket of people who can become homeless if something were to happen to their job. So this is a pretty grim picture in Canada. In the US, the story is very similar. I think this is the last point in time count was done in 2020, and they found over 500,000 people homeless on a given night, and 20% of those people were children. And over 100,000 people experience chronic homelessness, defined as being unhoused for at least 1 year. The average lifespan of an individual in homelessness is only 50 years in the US, which is much shorter than the average lifespan of an individual in the US, which is 78 years. And 13,000 people die as a result in homelessness. It also costs a lot of money to provide services to a homeless individual. And again, there's a quite big chunk of the population who are at the verge of becoming homeless. So it is a crisis. It's costing lives. It's costing a lot of money as well. So what are the solutions? What have been done in the past to address homelessness? Here are the existing approaches. The first approach is providing emergency services like shelters. That's the predominant model in a lot of cities in the world, especially in North America, to manage homelessness. The second approach is provide healthcare services like detox and other forms of health services to get people back on stability. And the third approach is provide permanent supportive housing. So very prime example is housing first, or also called rapid rehousing. That's another form of supportive housing. So I think those approaches have worked to some extent, and they have helped a certain proportion of people who experience homelessness. But they miss a core cause of homelessness, which is the lack of money. none of those approaches actually provides people with cash so that they can pay rent to get out of homelessness. The current welfare, or the welfare checks actually provide a bit of rental assistance, not toward market housing, but toward shelter costs. But that's, in my opinion, those proportion of the welfare check is far from being sufficient of getting people out of homelessness. Okay, so in this study, or in this project, my approach is very different. My approach is attacking the core cause of homelessness, which is the lack of money. Can we give people cash so that they can bring themselves out of homelessness instead of relying on, or using additional services to help them escape? The reason to look at cash is the following. In developing countries, decades of studies on unconditional cash transfer have shown the following. One is that unconditional cash transfers improve psychological well-being. It will, it has been shown to make people feel better about themselves, feel more efficacious of their own abilities, less stress. It also helps people's health conditions. They experience less cortisol or stress hormones as a result. They become physically healthier after getting the cash transfer. Some households or some individuals also have engaged in better financial management strategies with cash transfers. Some households experienced better food security. They were able to purchase furniture, livestock, etc. So those durable goods for their household, as well as purchasing more assets for their home. And finally, cash transfers can increase educational outcomes in children in particular, and employment outcomes for those who can work. So given these positive impacts, we think that cash transfer is a promising approach to tackle homelessness as well. And another important finding in the past studies is that there's actually a slight reduction on spending on temptation goods, defined as alcohol, tobacco, and gambling in the developing world context after the cash transfer. So this is in opposition with what a lot of people would assume on spending after getting cash transfers. So these are all the reasons to believe that cash transfer can help people who experience homelessness. So that's exactly what we set out to do. So to run this project, we had to break some walls and do it outside of the silos of academia. I teamed up with an organization called the Foundations for Social Change. This is all the way, we went back to 2016 when we first met. This foundation was founded by Claire Williams and Franz Chilangi. I teamed up with them as the principal investigator on this project. So we started the New Leaf Project. Our mission is basically to empower individuals to move beyond homelessness, to improve the quality of their lives at their own will. We also think that homelessness is a circumstance and not a character defect. So the model of our organization is believing someone, and that's our ethos guiding this project. So the New Leaf Project is a randomized control trial where we distributed $7,500 to each of 50 recently homeless individuals in Vancouver as a one-time unconditional cash grant, with another group of 65 individuals as controls. The reason we came up with $7,500 is that was the annual income assistance in British Columbia back in 2016. And now the income assistance has gone up. So this is no longer the annual income assistance rate. But this amount, the $7,500, was about 60% of their average annual personal income back in 2016. So it's a significant chunk of money for them. But of course, they also have other sources of income as well. And we tracked outcomes for our participants over 1 year at 1, 3, 6, 12, 9, and 12 months after the cash transfer. You can actually access the preprint online, which is freely available right now. So to do this project, we teamed up with several partner organizations. The first one is the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction in British Columbia. And the reason being, we cannot allow this cash transfer to jeopardize their eligibility for income assistance or social and health services as a result. So the current policy says if you have more than $2,000 in the bank account, you cannot qualify for an array of social services. So this cash transfer can potentially disqualify their access to these services or eligibility of these services. This is also called the benefits cliffs in the US. So to prevent that from happening or any clawback from the government from the cash transfer, we made an agreement with the ministry in BC to allow our participants to keep the cash transfer. They can keep every penny of it, and they are still eligible for any social health services they are eligible. They can access. So it does not impact them. There's no negative impact for our participants as a result of this cash transfer. So so the ministry is a key partner to make sure there's no harm done on these individuals in this project. Second is Vancity, that is a local credit union. They have agreed to provide free checking accounts for all of our participants, including control participants. So people can receive the cash transfer in their checking account as opposed to in a big envelope. Which is quite dangerous. So Vancity opened free checking accounts for all of our participants. And then we teamed up with 4 shelter organizations across the Lower Mainland to help recruit participants into the study and help us track those participants over time. So just to give you a sense of the distribution of these shelters, so here are the 22 shelters we recruited people from across the Lower Mainland. And here are the 6 Vancity branches at each hub of shelters that participants can go to and open their checking accounts. Okay, so here's our screening criteria. Not everybody is eligible for this project. We did screening based on a couple of criteria. The first one is participants have to be within the age of 19 and 65 years old. They must be homeless for less than 2 years, and they must be Canadian citizens or permanent residents. This data is readily available from the shelter, so shelter can refer us participants who met those criteria. Then once they refer to us, we will go into the shelter and conduct further screening. The first screening here in person will be DAST, that is the Drug Abuse Screening Test. This screens for severe substance use. So no participants can have severe substance use, and 50% of participants will pass this threshold with this criterion. The second one is audit, which is the Alcohol Use Disorders Identification Test. So again, 87% of participants pass this threshold. And the third one is CSI, it's Colorado Symptom Index. This measures psychiatric symptoms, and 74% of participants will pass this threshold. Okay, so we screened a total of over 700 participants. Excuse me. And about a third passed. And among the third, 115 participants completed the baseline survey. I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a flu. And sometimes I will have this random coughing fits that I have no control over. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, and the reason there's a drop off from 200 participants is after they did the screening, we need to do the baseline survey with these participants. And for a lot of those participants, we couldn't find them again. So it's purely because of loss of contact between screening and baseline. And the screening survey was done under a cover story with absolutely no mention of the cash. So they had no idea, or nobody had any idea that they may get cash later on in the study. Okay, so this is the randomized control trial. In its full design, there are 4 conditions. There are 2 cash groups and 2 non-cash groups. So the cash groups will get the $7,500 in one time with no strings attached. And then some of those participants will get a workshop, which is a 1-hour workshop where they discuss their goals, their plans, what they would like to do going forward, etc. And then some participants are also offered coaching, which is basically a 1-hour call with a live coach to talk about anything they want. In the control participant, some participants were also offered workshop and coaching, whereas another group, the final group, did not get any kind of these supports. So we did a comparison between group 1 and 2 and found that there was absolutely no difference between group 1 and 2. And likewise, we did a comparison between group 3 and 4. Again, there was no difference between 3 and 4. So that's why we combined 1 and 2 into a cash, we call it cash condition, and combined 3 and 4 into a non-cash condition. And that's also gives us more statistical power to detect any differences between cash and non-cash groups. In addition to these supports, we provided every participant in the study the following resources: honorarium for completing our surveys and interviews. We gave everybody a resource booklet that outlines all the local supports and services they can access in their area. We offered replacement ID services, so if they don't have an ID, we can replace it for free for them. We also offered people use the smartphone, and again, as I said, the Vancity checking account. So those additional resources are available and provided to everybody in this study. So all participants had those. So here's our participant sample in this entire study, starting from baseline to 1, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months over 1 year. As you can see that people, would drop out over time. And the primary reason for dropout was just simply loss of contact. We couldn't keep track of these individuals over time. One big reason is they moved across provinces, especially with the cash recipients. After they get the cash transfer, they tend to move back home. So especially most of them actually move back east, and there was no way for us to reach them again. A few participants withdrew from the study, and we also lost a few participants due to death. Okay. Oh, sorry, I just saw a question. Maybe I'll just quickly address this question from Sid. So the grievance screening criteria, what proportion of homeless population was generalized the findings? I think the 30% I think it's an overestimate, because initially we were sampling within the downtown east side, which was the homeless hub in Vancouver. That was the wrong population for our study. And after initial kind of that failure of not able to recruit anybody, we broadened our scope to the lower mainland. And that's when we got more and more participants who can pass the threshold. So my estimate, and right now we're running the expansion project, and our screening rate is at 70%. So given this knowledge, I would say that the at least half of the current homeless population in the Metro Vancouver area will pass our screening criteria. So I would say around 50%. Okay, so this is our participant demographics. The average age is 42 years old, and about 60% male, 40% female. A third of our participants have children. 12% were Indigenous. That's an underrepresentation. In the expansion project, we have made extra efforts to recruit more Indigenous participants. So the base rate is about 30% I think in Canada. In BC, I think it's a little lower, but right now in the expansion project, we are able to bring it up to 25%. So yeah, so but in this particular study, it was lower than the actual rate. The average duration of homelessness is 6 months, and a quarter had no personal ID, which we freely replaced for those people, and about 28% had some form of employment. And here's a list of reasons for why they're homeless. So the primary reason is evictions from their landlord. The second is financial constraints, just not being able to pay rent. There's some people who had conflicts with their family. That's why they got kicked out, for instance. So a lot were fleeing from domestic violence. That's very typical for women. So as you can see here, that substance use, mental health challenges is actually a very low kind of factor or reason for homelessness in our sample. So here are our kind of key takeaway from this whole trial. I'm showing you on this graph here, I'm showing you the standardized treatment effects from baseline to averaged over 1 year, controlling for the control participants. So the reference group is the control group. And the dark bars are the significant bars, and the gray bars are not significant. So the cash recipient spent significantly fewer days homeless. That's the first dark bar on the top. They also actually spent marginally more days in stable housing. They kept more savings over 1 year. They also spend more money over 1 year. That's expected and good news. They spend more money on durable goods like furniture, cars, bikes, etc. More money on. They also spend more money on rent, food, and transit. And then we actually didn't see any significant differences in food security, employment, education, cognitive functioning, or subjective well-being. There's actually, in terms of substance use, there was a marginal decline in substance use severity in the cash recipients. So that was very promising to see. And finally, we calculated service use, which is how much service people used over 1 year. This is social, health, or justice services. And cash recipients actually used less or showed less cost of these services compared to control participants over 1 year. And that cost savings was about $8,277 per person per year. That's very promising to see. And let me now get into the kind of the details of these findings. This is percent of days homeless for the cash group in blue and the control group in gray, from baseline to 12 months after the cash transfer. And each cash participant spent on average 99 fewer days homeless. And those significance mostly emerged from 1 to 6 months after the cash transfer. And eventually the control participants caught up, because if you're in Vancouver, you are put on a wait list. So if you're homeless in Vancouver, you put on a wait list for transitional housing for 6 months. And then at the end of 6 months, you are gradually transitioned out of the shelter. This is stable housing. So again, we see an increase in the percent of days in stable housing for the cash group, and control group, again, eventually caught up. Stable housing is defined as having their own place, apartment, or house sharing with others in a private home or house, SROs, basically occupancy, single room occupancy. So that's stable housing. This is spending per month. It's literally taking everything into account. How much did you spend a month? And the cash participant, the recipient, spend more money at 1 and 3 months compared to the control participants. This is spending on temptation goods, defined in this study as alcohol, spending on alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. For the cash recipient, on average, that spending has declined over 1 year. But for the control participants, it fluctuated a lot, and overall, there's a mild increase over time. And this challenges kind of the widespread misperception that people in poverty will spend money when they get the cash assistance. And this finding challenges such misperception. It demonstrates that that's not the case. When they get a windfall of cash, they actually decrease their spending on these items and not increase. This is the average monthly spending breakdown between cash and control participants on rent, food, transit, clothing, and if they'll have dependents, so food for their children or clothing for their children. This is the amount of savings they kept over time. And cash recipients kept more savings at 1 and 3 months, but eventually they exhausted their cash transfer after 9 months or 6 or 9 months or so. Well, because $7,500 in Vancouver is actually not that much money, so it makes sense that it will exhaust that fund quickly or in a few months. This is the cost benefit analysis from the reduced shelter use. And so each cash participant, as I mentioned before, produced over $8,000 in savings from the reduced shelter use. And so if we subtract the cash transfer, there's a net saving of about $700 per person per year from the cash transfer. Okay, so this is the people's testimony of what they did or what they thought of the cash transfer. I'm just citing 3 participants here. One participant said, it helped me out a lot. It gives me a purpose in life and hope. It's also given me the financial resources for me to get what I want, what I need for my house. Another participant said, the impact on my life was huge. I was able to do a lot of things I couldn't do before. It has changed my ability to make proper decisions or proper choices. Even if I had not received the cash transfer, I wouldn't be able to move out. I wouldn't be able to get my car back on the road, none of that. And another participant said it helped me solve a lot of issues. Now I have a place, I can focus on getting to school, getting that career, focus on my son. And those are the most important things. So these are kind of the qualitative data we have that resonate with our quantitative data on the impact of the cash transfer. So here's a quick summary of what I just presented. That one-time cash transfer reduced homelessness, increased spending, and generated cost savings for society over 12 months, with no increase in spending on temptation goods. And here are the mechanisms. So 1 month, I think more people were able to move into stable housing. And then up to 3 months, people bought durable goods like furniture or car and food to feed themselves and their family. Up to 6 months, they used up most of the cash transfer. And then 6 to 12 months, the control group eventually caught up. So the cash transfer can indeed help people move out of homelessness faster. So here's the policy recommendation, which is distribute this one-time cash transfer to recently homeless individuals without severe substance use, alcohol use, or psychiatric symptoms. But this is a small sample size. We need more data. And that's exactly what we're doing right now. We're running an expansion study that will cover 400 participants. So 200 will get the cash transfer. We increased the cash transfer to $8,500 because the income assistance has gone up since 2016. But we also we provide a variety of non-cash supports to all participants in this study, and we're measuring kind of the same set of outcomes. So this study is ongoing. We have recruited 100 people at this point. We aim to wrap up the recruitment of all 400 by the end of this year. So next year, I hope to come back and present you the results of the expansion study. Okay, now to actually move this into policy, we have to consider how the public view people in homelessness and the cash transfer. And I think there's a barrier, at least both on both a policy front and also on a public front, which is people tend to distrust individuals who are homeless. And this distrust or mistrust can actually prevent from policy change, actually, setting this cash transfer policy. Because people have the assumption that if we give cash transfers to people who experience homelessness, they're going to squander the cash and they're going to spend it on drugs, for instance. And this is how I measured this public mistrust. So I recruited over 1,000 people in North America, and I simply presented this cash transfer study. I said, imagine there's a program that distributes $7,500 to people in homelessness, but again, who are recently homeless without severe substance use, alcohol use, and psychiatric symptoms. How much do you think the cash recipient will spend on temptation goods? So alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes. We presented this person as someone else, or this person is you, the participant themselves. We either portrayed this person as homeless or non-homeless. And this is their answer. People think that if it's someone else who's homeless, they will spend almost double the amount of money on temptation goods compared to if somebody's non-homeless or if that person is you themselves. So this quantifies the amount of mistrust people have toward people experiencing homelessness. We also asked people for their support for policy. So we asked them, how much do you support a public policy that distributes this cash transfer to people who are homeless? Again, almost describing exactly what this study did. We either asked this question outright, like as in the control group, or we framed this policy in terms of in a counter-stereotypical frame. So we said this cash transfer has been shown to reduce spending on temptation goods and increase spending on rent and food, or we presented the study with this finding in a utilitarian frame. So this cash transfer reduced people's reliance on social services and produced net savings for society. And what we found was the counter-stereotypical frame or the utilitarian frame actually can significantly boost people's support for this policy compared to nothing at all, which is the control group. So that's one way of countering that mistrust in the public to increase public support for this cash transfer policy. Okay, so I think it's, this is the beginning of a body of evidence to show that cash transfers can work to reduce homelessness. We need to increase that evidentiary base for the cash transfer. We also, at the same time, we have to reduce the public mistrust of people getting cash transfers who are homeless. I think, as I showed earlier, public support can be increased by emphasizing the reduced spending on temptation goods or reduced reliance on social services and increasing the net savings for society. So I think that's one way forward. Okay, with that, I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank my student, my partners at Foundations for Social Change, and my funding sources. Okay, back to you, Evelyn or Hannah.
Thanks very much, Jiaying. I think it is a wonderful presentation, and I think we've got lots of time for questions, if anybody has questions they'd like to ask. And I think Hannah is going to monitor.
Yeah, there's a few questions in the chat here. So you did answer one of them. Josh asked, did you measure if participants were more or less likely to receive other financial benefits, federal or provincial, they're eligible for?
Yeah, we did not see a significant increase in other sources of financial benefits in our study. But there was a kind of a numerical increase in the amount of income assistance people are getting after. I think what happens is that after we get their ID back, they can actually put themselves on income assistance. So that was the only difference we saw, but again, it was not significant. But that would the increased income assistance was because of getting the ID back as opposed to getting the cash transfer.
Sid asked a follow-up question. Did dropouts differ from other participants on demographic variables and reasons for homelessness?
That's a great question. So the dropout rate was the same across cash and control conditions. So it's about 31%. The attrition rate was 31% in both conditions. In terms of demographic variables, there was no, we ran a regression to predict dropout in the study. I think the only significant variable was substance use. So the more, let's say, so nobody actually had severe levels, but almost everybody has some levels of use. So the greater substance use you had at the beginning of the study, the more likely you were to drop out. But that's true for both cash and control conditions.
Elizabeth asks, what happened to those who found housing with the cash transfer at the end of the study time? Was there any eviction or were further supports offered?
At the end of the study, so this is like at the like close to the 12 months mark.
Yeah, I think what she's asking is for those who had found housing during the study period when they had the cash transfer, was there any supports that were offered? Or was there an increase in eviction because, you know, people didn't have the support anymore?
No, so oh, I see. So when they used up the money, then did they get evicted or not? So that there was I think, let me go back to that slide. There was like a numeric tick at the 12 months, but it was not significant. Let me just represent this data here. So this is maybe this is the graph that I think Elizabeth was picking up on, right? So at the kind of, you know, at the 12 months mark, there was kind of like a very brief uptick. It was not, first of all, it was not significantly different from 9 months. And it was only because the 12 months, the amount of people were so, when there's not many people in the study. So I wouldn't interpret this as they're back on the street. So people who moved out of homelessness, they remained in stable housing over time. The reason that there was a numeric increase at 12 months was that some participants that we lost contact came back at 12 months and they happened to still be homeless. This is, you know, both the cash and control group. It does not mean that the cash recipients lost housing at 12 months. So that was that. It's not strictly the same people between 12 and 9 months. So to answer that question, no, they did not get evicted. In terms of supports, we didn't give them another cash transfer in this study, but we did have support in terms of we connected with them every 3 months. We offered them, the free. We have non-cash supports available to all participants, but we didn't give them any additional cash beyond the $7,500 and the honorarium that they've received from completing the surveys.
Okay, great. Heather asked, did the cash transfer folks have a drop in their outlook on life when the money ran out?
No, actually, that's a good question. So we collected qualitative data for both cash and non-cash participants, and the cash participants did say, yeah, I spent the cash. It will be great to have another cash transfer, but they did not get sad or depressed or feel worse after they run out. That's not, at least now, was not the sense we gathered from our cash recipients. So for a lot of the cash recipients, they were able to, actually support themselves outside of the cash transfer. Some actually got. Maybe I can show you some unemployment data. We looked at the amount of hours worked. Oh yeah, so this is the employment data. We tracked how many hours they worked and actually the pay per hour as well. So cash recipients are actually worked. This is, again, not overall, over 12 months, it was not significant, but at 1 month and 12 months, cash recipients were actually worked more hours, but only at these 2 time points. We looked at pay per hour, and cash recipients actually were able to increase their pay per hour at 3 and 6 months compared to baseline. So what these suggest me results, these are again very preliminary because they're not significant over 1 year. But what these data suggest is that maybe they were able to work more hours because they can put their kids to daycare or school. That's actually one of the things we've heard repeatedly from single moms. After the cash transfer, they said, I can now relax and get to work because my kid is in daycare or at school. And some people have been able to switch jobs to a higher paying job. And that's why they're able to increase their pay per hour. So I think those are the ways that they can support themselves over time in the long term, as opposed to relying on the cash transfer in the first couple months.
Very interesting. Laura asks, why was support at the beginning of the study, for example, life coaching, limited to a short amount of time?
So the coaching was a failure, unfortunately. The reason being, there's several reasons. The practical reason was UBC Ethics Board wouldn't let us run the study without providing some form of coaching or workshop or non-cash support to the cash group, because they just wouldn't let us give people cash alone. And so we had to come up with something that will appease the ethics committee. So that's why we came up with coaching. But coaching didn't work because the life coach we had was actually not, it's not the supports that these participants need at this time. The life coach was something like, they want to talk about your life goals and what you want to do as a person. And it's very holistic, and it's almost like too high level than the survival needs they have. Is finding housing, how to do my resume, what I should wear to this job interview. So that's why after one or two phone calls with the coach, the participants just never called them back. It was just not the right support that they need. And also, we actually, basically said, to get the cash, we're going to give you a coach. And you cannot force somebody to be coached. Just like counseling, you cannot force somebody to get counseling. So I just think on several levels, coaching is not the right support to our participants. And maybe in a few years, after they, let's say, I would say even after 1 year, maybe they will be more receptive to coaching, but certainly not at this time of their life. So that's why coaching just didn't work, period.
Yeah, that's really interesting. People have some great questions. Okay. Sid asks, are you aware of findings uncontrolled from Alaska's basic income of increased substance use? And why might these findings be different from yours?
Yeah, I am aware of that uncontrolled trial in Alaska. I think the BI trial in Alaska is very different from what we are doing. I think they're giving people like more regular payments over time, and it's to, I think, everyone. Whereas in our study, it was a very select sample of the homeless population. So these, and also our cash transfer is one time as opposed to monthly payments. These are I think the key differences between our trial and theirs. Yeah, and also I think one thing that at a psychological level, the Alaska trial is kind of like hey, we have some money here, here's some additional income. As opposed to in our trial, we framed it as, we believe in you, this is something you can do for yourself, spend it however you want. That's kind of, it's a different message from just use this money that everybody gets. So, I mean, I think these are the reasons for the differences, but again, these are very different populations and contexts, which is why I think we have very different results.
Yeah, that makes sense. A question from Dennis. Were any quality of life self-rated health surveys administered at baseline and over the year? Also, could you talk about the journey you must have had to secure funding for the project and for recipients?
Thank you. Thanks for mentioning the funding aspect. I'll get to that. The health aspect, unfortunately, we didn't have physical health measures. We did have, let me show you our subjective health measures and subjective well-being. Maybe let me start with subjective well-being. So I do have a couple of backup slides. So this is our result on subjective well-being, and this has several measures: satisfaction with life, positive emotions, and any absence of negative emotions. And this is all Z-scored across the two conditions. So it's again, the data are very noisy on this measure, but there's a temporary kind of increase at 1 month in subjective well-being for cash recipients, but then nothing, no difference whatsoever. So it seems like the cash recipients felt really happy, really good at 1 month, but then I think once they changed their environments, especially when they found housing, they have to change their social network. Their community is different. They have to adapt to a new life, which could be very stressful. So that's why we don't see differences after that, but there was a temporary increase there. In terms of health, I don't think, perceived, yes, we have perceived health measure. This is just one question on just overall, how would you describe your health? Like from very good to excellent to poor, so 1 to 5. And interesting, I don't know why there's no significant differences here, but the cash group tend to be just lower than the control group overall, and there was no difference over time, which is kind of surprising to us. Yeah, so that's all I can say on health, on the health front. On the funding side, that's very interesting. So we got most of the funding for this project from private donors and private foundations who actually want us to take a risk and show proof of concept. So that's how we're able to fundraise for this project and also for the expansion project. The government, none of the Tri-Council, the academic funding bodies would never fund our project. I think they're very risk averse in that sense. But for this New Leaf project, the Employment and Social Development Canada did provide $500,000 to us. So that was part of their homeless reduction strategy. So we did receive some funding from the government, from the federal government, but most of the funding still came from the private, the philanthropic sector.
Great. Okay, so there's a few follow-up questions actually related to the life coaching that you had answered. So Annie says perhaps employment coaching would be a better fit. Lisa says did the life coach have any specific training related to homelessness or financial empowerment? And someone else had said, how about life skills coaching? So yeah, people have questions on if there was a better way to have brought in life coaching just at a different angle.
That's definitely, yes, that's our lesson learned. I think employment coaching could be very helpful. A coach to help people find available homes, like not a realtor, but something like a realtor would really help, just to tell people here are the housing options. That would help, at least for the first couple months. So I think, yes, I think if we provide coaching on these very specific needs, that will work really well. And that's something we're doing for the expansion project. So we remove coaching and workshop altogether now, but instead we're providing them with, like financial literacy training. So we're targeting very specific needs. So finding them, helping them find housing, jobs, schools for the children, etc. So that's what we're doing, and that's certainly a lesson learned from this project.
And so I presume that was a lesson learned from doing the life coaching that didn't pan out. And was that feedback that you'd received from the participants to say, okay, the life coaching isn't quite right for us, but here are all of the other resources that could be
Yeah, it's the lesson that we heard from the coaches. The coaches are basically, they said that the conversation is very difficult because I asked them, what do you want? Like, what are your goals? And they just asked me, how do I do my, how do I make my resume, right? It's a very different a conversation, and it's almost complete mismatch for participants' needs and what the coach can offer. And that's a lesson we've really learned, and we've also asked participants what kind of coaching or just the supports do you need, and they definitely gave us pointers as to what would really help them. So yeah, so that's, I think life skills coaching. I mean, that's kind of we wanted to do at first, but again, we have to really target these specific skills to be useful to our participants.
Great. And just one more comment here on the life coaching side. Lisa says, not to toot my profession's own horn, but occupational therapists have also shown to have a big impact in addressing life areas versus life coaching. And Annie says this is a great point and very holistic in a client-centered way. So just a comment to take note of. Evelyn asks, one of the challenges you must face is that you omitted a large group of people with psychiatric challenges and severe substance use. Can you explain why you did that? And what do you think the consequences might have been for your results, and how would it have affected some of your policy conclusions?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think we started with the low-hanging fruit and targeting people without these severe challenges. So I don't know whether the cash transfer will benefit people with psychiatric challenges and severe substance use. I think that's an open question. I think the cash transfer can help, but it may not be the resource that they need at that point, or not yet. So one idea that we've been toying with was we can tag the cash transfer to some, let's say, services or treatments that they're currently receiving, and not in the form of conditional cash transfer, but let's say if somebody's in detox, then we give them the then we can tag the cash transfer along to that treatment. And so the reason I say that is, it's one is to kind of build confidence for ethics committee. I think ethics need to see that the cash transfer can actually work for someone with severe challenges and substance use. So we need to kind of show, well, at least in our sample, those who, even with, let's say, the highest level of substance use and psychiatric symptoms, they still show positive impacts or benefits from the cash transfer. So that's good. And we just sort of used a cutoff on those scales, right? So it doesn't mean that those people who are above the scale, above that cutoff, would not benefit. My guess is that they will, but we need to get data to, we need to actually run that trial to see the impact. But to run that trial, I think I need to have something to convince the ethics committee to let us do that. So maybe one foot in the door technique is maybe let's tack that along with existing treatments or services that people are accessing already, and look at the cash transfer that way, the impact of cash transfer that way. So that would be that's something that we're thinking about doing.
Thank you.
So yeah, so we can't generalize that to everybody at this point, absolutely not. But it is our goal to kind of cover the entire population at some point.
That's great. So we have time for two more. This has been a really lively and interesting chat, and thanks everyone for all the questions. So we have time for two more, one from Dennis and one from Laura. So we'll start with Dennis's question. Perhaps a bigger picture, longer term question, but do you have any plans to broaden your research scope to look more at a comprehensive basic income program in BC? Is there an appetite for such research in your province?
Yes, there is. There's absolutely appetite for that. So we just got a new premier, David Eby. We're in conversation with him about running a kind of BI-like program. By that I mean, we're trying to convince him to run a repeated transfer. So 8,500 one year, 8,500 in the next year at the very least, just to see whether that would further improve the outcomes that we have seen so far. So yeah, so and there is a lot of discussion on basic income in BC. there's definitely an appetite and demand. Right now is just we need to get the political will on board, and yeah, so that's what we're working on.
That's encouraging to hear. Hopefully, BC will be a trailblazer, and yeah, hopefully that'll be something that comes across to other provinces too. I'm just, gosh, there's so many questions. Aaron asks, it seems the CERB would have been an excellent opportunity to conduct a similar study. I work closely with First Nations and heard many stories of the positive impacts of the CERB linked to its fewer conditions compared to income assistance. Just a comment in there that I thought was interesting. Laura asked, do you think you would be able to get support to include people with psychiatric challenges or substance abuse, kind of like what Evelyn's question was referring to? How can we show how it affects these groups without those studies?
Without those studies,
I guess the question is that we don't know how these cash transfers would impact people with psychiatric challenges or severe substance use if we're not doing that sort of research. So do you have any comments on that?
I would love to include all populations, you know, in this project eventually, but we have access to these populations. I mean, right now the expansion part in the expansion project, we're working with 36 different community organizations on the ground to recruit people. So I think there's an appetite to try this idea. I think the challenge is really the ethics board at UBC. That is really my biggest challenge for this project. To convince them, I think I need, you know, to show some proof of concept or risk mitigation, harm reduction strategies. Yeah, it's hard. I don't have an answer yet. I think that probably would depend on what this expansion project shows and what the province is willing to do with us. So yeah, I think eventually, I think, yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to run that study with the you know, people with severe psychiatric challenges. It's just right now it doesn't. Right now, it's not going to happen at UBC. Maybe it will happen in Manitoba. But I'm sure it will happen at some point. I just don't have the answer yet.
Okay, great. That's I think all the time we have for questions. Thanks, everyone. I'll send it back to Evelyn, but that was quite a lively discussion and a lot of great questions in there.
I think the questions were fantastic, and I think we could continue this all night, but I think I have to thank you at this point and give you a chance to rescue your throat after that presentation. But this has been a great presentation, and I think you're sending us away with a lot of things to think about. And so I really, really very much appreciate your coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you all for your questions and staying this late.
And I think that wraps it up tonight. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, Hannah, is there a way for me to save the chat, or can I just save a copy of the chat here? Yeah, I can save chat. Okay.
Perfect. And we'll have a recording up as soon as possible, and I'll get Evelyn to send that around to folks.
If Evelyn can figure out how to do that, she would be delighted to.
Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.